Hello and
Hello.
welcome. Hello to Hoppy Valley, and for the first time, we're actually here with you in person to some extent, although it is not live. Well, it's live for us, but it's not live for you. I'm Blue, and this is Jim.
I'm Jim.
Um, we've got a bit of a controversial one. If there's anyone
Oh,
from Nottingham City Council watching,
I love
which
controversy.
which we hope there is, we like a bit of controversy, don't we, Jim?
You do.
Um, Today we're going to talk about Robin of Needwood, not Robin of Sherwood. So Robin Hood is a an outlaw originating in medieval Staffordshire. Well, where do we begin, Jim?
Well, I mean, I suppose let's start with that question that is often so debated about Robin of Sherwood. Is that is this a real person? Because there are a lot of people, and certainly, if you ask history teachers up and down the country, or if you ask historians, is Robin Hood a real person? A lot of people will say to you, no. He's mythology. He's not real. He's not a real historical figure, which I take some issue with personally. I'm not sure I agree with that. Where do you stand on the reality of Robin?
Robin, I think, is well, as we're going, I think we'll find out in the course of this discussion, something of a medieval type, a bit of a trope of a medieval outlaw, but not necessarily. That doesn't necessarily mean that there was no individual who might have inspired that idea, or a set of individuals who might have inspired that idea. I mean, I think we can see, if we look at the historiography of Robin Hood a little bit, we can see how Robin changes through the years, and I think that it itself suggests that he's not based on one real person. But just to sort of get a bit of context, let's get some dates on this. Robin first appears, the first reference we have to Robin Hood is in the 1370s, and that's in William Langland's Piers Plowman. Um, in this book, Langland says, in terms of some members of the clergy, that they know the rhymes of Robin Hood better than they know the mass or various parts of prayer. So the idea that the Robin Hood ballads are in circulation in the 1370s gives us a little bit of an idea as to when they may have originated. And I think for something to be famous within an oral tradition, it's got to have been knocking around for about 50 years. So that puts us into the 1320s as the origination of the Robin Hood ballads, which is a really fascinating decade, especially for Burton historians, because something happened in the 1320s, Jim.
Yeah. Well, the big incident in Burton in the 1320s was the first Battle of Burton.
The first
Hmm.
battle of Burton Bridge. Now, the Victorian um, historian Joseph Hunter had isolated an actual man called Robin Hood, who was in the service of King Edward II, who was one of the people who took part in the Battle of Burton Bridge. So this is a really interesting idea that an actual man called Robin Hood, who may have been one of many different inspirations for the Robin Hood idea, may have been in the service of someone who was moving around the Midlands at the time. There was the Spencer Wars going on. Roger Mortimer had risen up against King Edward II in the early part of 1322. This actual historical Robin Hood could have been in the retinue of Edward II, going making his progress through Staffordshire, um, against the Earl of Lancaster, who retreats to Tutbury Castle, of which we'll hear more later, and then off to Pontefract Castle, and these are all places that latterly come up in Robin Hood ballads. South Yorkshire is a prime location within the ballads. We'll see Tutbury coming up, and we'll see Sherwood and Nottingham coming up as well. So they're all places that I think Edward II would have been uh, places he would have been in 1322 uh, in the Midlands and South Yorkshire. So that's quite an interesting connection there. I think you mentioned something that was quite interesting in terms of the nature of Robin Hood and the kind of way that that fits in with our modern perception of someone like James Bond.
Yeah, I wondered whether there is something to do with Robin Hood being almost a title as opposed to an individual. Certainly we know from several historians, including the one you mentioned, um, have, said, here is a real man called Robin Hood, and that may well be where it started from. But then does the name take on a life of its own, much like James Bond? As one James retires from the service, another James is put into the role. You take the name with the job, and in a similar way, is being Robin more of a title? And oh well, he's Robin Hood. Um,
Yeah,
or
kind of
even
like a
are you
role that someone's
a
taken on. Yeah,
Robin Hood? Yeah. Which I find interesting as well, along with the fact that there are many May Day festivities and Robin Hood plays later on coming to May Day festivities. So certainly there would be in every May Day festivity a Robin Hood. But how far does that role then go?
yeah.
We know that May Day festivities in early years got quite spirited, shall we say?
I think we're gonna be looking at what, particularly in relation to Tutbury, the sort of thing that happened there,
Yeah.
a little bit later on. But just if I could just continue with this kind of progress of history
Yeah.
in relation to Robin Hood, um, we've got some early ballads, Robin Hood and the Monk from 1450. So we've gone on nearly 100 years from Piers Plowman there. Um, and another one published by this German printer called Winken de Verde, who came over to England, and he published this piece called "The Little Jest" of Robin Hood, his birth, breeding, valet, and marriage at Tutbury bull running. Sorry. So that's a fascinating title for a piece of work from the 15th century, and that really puts Robin in Needwood, doesn't it? Because he in this story, he's well, I think you're going to give us a quick blast of it, but he's in a nutshell. He meets this person who you also suggested, Clorinda, the Queen of the Shepherdesses.
Yeah.
Almost like a role within an annual play or fair. So Robin Hood could be another role within an annual play or fair. Would you like to give us a quick blast of the actual?
Yeah, so
Um,
this is an extract. This battle was fought near Tutbury town when the bagpipes baited the bull. I am king of fiddlers and swear it is the truth, and I call him that doubteth a gull. For I saw them a fighting and fiddled the while, and Clorinda sang Hayberry down. The bumpkins are beaten, put up thy sword, Bob, and now let's dance into town. Before we came in, we heard a strange shouting, and all that were in looked madly. And some were a Black Bull, and some dancing a Morris, and some singing Arthur a Bradley. And there we saw Thomas, our justice's clerk, and Mary, to whom he was kind. And Tom rode before her, and called Mary madam, and kissed full sweetly behind. And so may your worship. But we went to dinner with Thomas and Mary and Nan. They all drank a health to Clorinda and told her bold Robin was a fine man. When dinner was ended, Sir Roger the parson of Doveridge was sent for in haste, He brought his mass book and bid them take hands, and he joined them in marriage full-faced. And then, as bold Robin and his sweet bride went hand in hand to the sweet bower, the birds sung with pleasure in merry Sherwood, and it was a most joyful hour.
And that's dating from uh,
1889.
1489, yeah. Um, so we're just in into the Tudor period. Usually, medieval period ends seems to be ending around 1485, but it's a tradition that's been around since we think since the 1320s. It's
Yeah.
150 years of tradition. Um, the these early ballads of Robin Hood, they are kind of location specific. Quite often, he's seen to be related to Sherwood, and
Sherwood,
the Great
Needwood,
North Road,
Derbyshire.
because he goes to York, and
Yeah.
he still go to York if he was from Needwood, because our own Ricknold Street pretty much runs to York.
Mm. Well, and of course, then you've got just up in that neck of the woods, York Way, Whitby, you've got Robin Hood's Bay.
We've got Robin Hood's Bay, but looking into that, the title of Robin Hood's Bay, it isn't recorded before 1544. So we're a bit later with that. I mean, not to say it wasn't called that before then, but um, it does seem a little bit later as a piece of evidence. Um, when we get into the Reformation, Robin Hood changes his personality as well, because he's always of a yeoman class in the medieval tradition. Um,
He becomes gentrified, doesn't he?
he does. I mean, just before we move on to talk about that, just in terms of what a medieval outlaw, what it actually was to be a medieval outlaw, and a little bit about the forest law. I mean, the medieval outlaw idea is that I think they were called wolf's heads because there was no penalty for killing an outlaw. You go and kill one, nothing happened. You might have even been rewarded for it. Similarly, for taking property from one, there was no penalty. So the law really didn't have any sort of protection of these people. Hence the name that they were outlaws. But it's a very very precarious position to be in if you're a medieval outlaw. It's going to be dangerous for people to help you, and there's no penalty for someone coming along and killing you. So you've got to sort of work within your own networks outside of jurisdiction of anyone who's relating to authority. I think as well, if we just look at the the sorts of places where the outlaws go and live, they always tend to be the forests, don't they? What was
Yeah.
the sort of what was a forest? What does a forest mean in those days, Jim?
Well, the word forest doesn't necessarily mean a place full of trees. The word forest has the same root origin as the word foreign, and forests don't appear in England until the Norman conquest, because forest at that time means a reservation of land under a separate law. And that land is reserved for the king and those he allows to hunt deer. Certainly, we know it's often said that a deer had more rights, a royal deer has more rights than the common man. Um, and there's some interesting thing. I mean, one of the oldest forests in the UK is the New Forest. It's called the New Forest because it was the first one they set up when they got it, pretty much. And there's interesting things. In fact, I learned a new word doing this bit of research: disafforestation. Disafforestation is when an area is relinquished from this royal control and returned to common use. Which I find interesting because there are Needwood, remains royal hunting ground and preserve well into the Tudor times. Um, I did have a date for it, but I've lost it. I'm just trying to find it now. Looking through my notes.
There was a an application to what's the word uh, to sort of partition it from in about 1650, I think. But it's I think it's 1800 until it actually goes
Yeah,
back into common usage. Although it's late, it's a much later forest to become, or to become. It's much later to become a forest in the first place. Only becoming a forest, I think, in the is it the 1300 late 1200s after the
yeah, it's 1200s, I think.
after Simon de Montfort's rebellion, and where it's taken away from the ownership of uh, Lord Ferrers, isn't it, or the Ferrers
Yeah,
family, because they
but
they backed the wrong
interestingly,
horse in the de Montfort
Sherwood is
civil war.
disafforested in 1227.
Which one?
Sherwood. So we've almost got this movement in the 13th century of royal hunting happening in Sherwood, moving to Needwood, which I found quite interesting. And when I looked at the ballad that I was reading from, there's an interesting passage where Robin visits his uncle, and his uncle says, "We'll go to hunt in Sherwood." Now, if Robin is visiting his uncle and they're in Needwood and it's Royal Hunting Reserve, there's good reason they would go to hunt a deer in Sherwood, which isn't that far from Needwood, because that was then common land and they'd be allowed to. So I found that quite an interesting little detail.
I mean, the disafforestation of Needwood doesn't mean that it's not under the justices of Eyre anymore, though, either.
No,
The justices of Eyre, who EYRE, were the people who actually kind of they they had they were the people who exerted the law on that particular jurisdiction of forest. So if it's disafforested, but it still has that jurisdiction, to what extent is it utterly disafforested? That's the question. Um, Sherwood remains under the justices of Eyre to some extent, much later than the date that it was
but, but,
disafforested in.
but is that a lesser crime than hunting in the King's Forest?
Well, yeah, this is the difficult thing to establish, isn't it? I'm not sure what levels of jurisdiction they've got on that.
I
What
mean, certainly,
disafforestation really means in terms of its ultimate,
yeah,
you know.
certainly 13th century England, you're not going to have to go too far to find a deer.
Mm.
They were a lot more widespread, a lot more common, and also you're going to not, you know, you could go from Sherwood to Needwood without really leaving the woodland at that time.
Yeah, I mean
It's
we've almost got kind of continuous. Well, the idea of the national forest stretching from like Kinver Forest through Needwood, Charnwood, Sherwood. There's a big central part of central England that is, you know, that is wooded.
yeah, and
Uh,
historically was wooded.
yeah.
So, it's not as if, and that's, again, that's the interesting thing with these different forest reserves. Which in this forest, it's about who owns what land and where you can hunt. And certainly, we don't know Robin's uncle's rights. Maybe he's got permission to hunt in Sherwood. That's why he suggests it. Um, I like the idea that there are these in a wholly wooded area where you've not got to stray far to go and find a deer. The idea of having to travel to go and hunt comes into that whole idea of ownership of parcels of land, right and privilege. And I think that's a really interesting tie-in to the whole concept of Robin Hood as an outlaw in itself. Because as the symbolic outlaw, well, I'll hunt where I want.
Yeah, we we know that he's getting married in Doveridge. We know that he's in Tutbury. Just a little bit about this Tutbury. Some of our viewers might not be aware of the significance of the Tutbury bull running um, reference there. Do you want to just go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so running the bulls at Tutbury. I mean, I'm sure people will be more familiar with the concept of running the bulls in Pamplona, Spain. Well, we have our own link to central Spain here in Burton, in Tutbury, because we had John of Gaunt being the Dutch Duke of Lancaster and having control over Tutbury Castle. And he was also the King of Castile in Spain, and reputedly brought the running of the bulls back with him to Tutbury. Having said that, this is where it gets a little interesting because, in terms of dates, John of Gaunt isn't born until 1340, and we've got then this overlap with Robin's um, battle, Robin's battle of the fort at Tutbury, and the running of the bulls in the ballad. But certainly, we know for a fact, historical records, bulls were running Tutbury as part of a annual festivity.
That went up to the 18th century, didn't it? And I think it was sort of banned because it got a little bit out of hand.
Yeah, there were some health and safety concerns, shall we say.
Yeah, I'll say
I
there
mean,
might have been.
the streets in Tutbury aren't that wide, are they?
There's quite a lot of alcohol consumed as well.
I mean, I'm going to go. I'm going to say yes.
And I believe it's all about whether if the bull ended up on the Staffordshire side of the River Dove or the Derbyshire side of the River Dove,
Yeah.
depending on who was considered to have won the day. So there could be an interesting thing to reintroduce, Jim. I think, couldn't it?
Well, I'm all for bringing back old traditions as long as I'm more in an administrative role rather than a running role. I'm happy with that.
That's a shame. I'd like to see that. Well, let's see if
I,
the new
I'm not.
administrators have.
I'm not
Sorry,
seen to run very often.
no, I've never seen it. Whether the new administrators of Tutbury Castle bring that back in, that'd be quite a good idea, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So we've got John of Gaunt takes on the Duchy of Lancaster estate in 1372, I think. So we've got a little bit of a gap there, potentially, but it's interesting that we have this idea that okay, the 1370s come up again. John of Gaunt's in Tutbury. There's a first mention of Robin Hood. Um, that's the first ever mention of Robin Hood that we have still on record. Robin changes after the Reformation, and he stops being a yeoman class man. He stops being like a man on the run, a sort of member of normal society to some extent. He becomes a nobleman, particularly at the hands of William Stukeley in the 18th century. And he then becomes Robert. He's Robert of Huntingdon, who was well supposedly a real character from the 12th century, contemporary of King John. But actually turned out that William Stukeley had probably invented him, so he didn't exist. But the idea is it's a sort of retrofit that Robin Hood was actually a member of the aristocracy, and this is an interesting change because one of the things that drives this change, I think, is that Robin originally he's always punishing clerical abuses. He's very big on going to St Mary's Abbey in York, the Benedictine Abbey in York, and making sure that any financial irregularities that they may be sort of doing, that he's going to redress those. Quite a lot of Robin Hood and the Monk, the original 15th century ballad, is all about that. So Robin Hood's definitely a figure of clerical abuse and someone who spots that. And obviously in the Protestant Reformation, British society wants to highlight. It's the old church, of course, that Robin Hood was complaining about, the Roman Catholic Church. That they want to use this stick to beat the Roman Catholic Church with, and use it through the guise of Robin.
I mean, he becomes a fool, doesn't he? Um, by this point, he's so much of a folkloric character. He's so much part of our culture and tradition that writers from a noble class are drawn to him. They adopt him. They adapt him. Entertainment in this time again is becoming shifted so that whereas entertainment in earlier years was something that was for all, it's becoming schismed where we've got different classes of entertainment. You can pay to go to a better quality of performance. You can have better seats in theatre. And as that happens, we also get this idea of patronship of theatre, patronship of the arts. You have companies of performers working for different lords, for different kings, and in order to get that patronage, you start writing your works to appeal to those people. So the gentrification of Robin almost seems inevitable because of the way that entertainment and the funding of the arts at that time shifts.
Yeah. We see obviously Robin changing again. The stage Robin seems to collect a lot of different characters, secondary characters along the way. Maid Marian, for example, doesn't really feature until Stukely. I don't think in the 18th century. Not much about her. And then he transferred to screen, initially in the guise of Douglas Fairbanks and Errol Flynn. And we get after that, I mean, because the Hollywoodization of Robin obviously just becomes much more about the trope, and very very little to do with any kind of historical basis. The idea that he's contemporary to King John doesn't have any historical basis in it whatsoever. We've got absolutely no record of that. The only record that's mentioned, the king that's mentioned, is in fact King Edward, but it doesn't say which King Edward. So I think we're much more historically on the right lines with what we were talking about before. Nottingham's benefited a great deal from Robin Hood, hasn't it? Tourism wise, and you can't escape Robin Hood when you're in Nottingham. I mean, Nottingham Castle's some kind of like the current ones have got Victorian folly, isn't it? I mean, it's got some caves, but I don't. We're going to be controversial here. And if anyone from Nottingham is watching, then give us a comment. Keep it clean, though. So yeah, Robin of Needwood. Why not? We've got. There's enough evidence to suggest that he's from this area. We've got Tutbury Castle is a big sort of focus of this activity. We know that Doveridge claims to be the place he was married. Robin of Locksley, there's a village of Locksley just outside Uttoxeter, on the south side of Uttoxeter, which is firmly within the Needwood Forest remit.
Although Locksley doesn't really come about more until the gentrification, does it?
Don't know when Locksley's first mentioned, but it's an interesting connection anyway. Um, we know that. Well, we've got a fairly early our 1489 ballad linking him to Tutbury is a fairly early one,
Yeah,
and no
yeah.
one's really mentioned that, and no one's ever kind of come up with that as part of the Robin Hood mythology that he had any kind of connection to Tutbury and the bull running at Tutbury, which is I find quite interesting that it's not there.
I mean, the earliest record we have of the character of Robin Hood firmly locates him at Tutbury.
I mean,
Um,
there's the record, the what's it called, Robin Hood and the Monk predates the little jest of Robin Hood, but it's not far off. So they're about contemporary, aren't they?
yeah,
Robin Hood and the Monk thinks 1450, so it does predate our version, but it's not by much. But Robin, the Robin Hood and the Monk really talks about Robin going to St Mary's in York, and he's somewhere in South Yorkshire, um, in a forest that can be described as the Sherwood Forest, but is really where does one forest end and another one begin? I suppose there is a legal jurisdiction about the boundary of it. Um, Maybe that's where the blue posts would be then, I suppose.
yeah. We know that. I mean, certainly from the naming of pubs in Burton, we know we've got a Blue Posts pubs in Burton, and we know we have a boundary for Needwood Forest in Burton.
Yeah,
Um, and the demarcation of royal hunting grounds was done with blue posts.
yeah.
Um, would whilst we're on that kind of legal jurisdiction and the would you like to hear some of the penalties that were offenders could get for breaking forest law?
Well, I mean, I suppose the question, would I like to hear them, probably isn't really the right question. Our viewers may be interested to know.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to. Yeah, I've got them, and I'd like to share them. Maybe that's maybe a better way of putting it. So the severity of the punishment for forest offences was modified by Richard I to be less severe, and it was no longer considered as penal to kill deer as to kill a man. So by Richard I, it's no longer as bad killing a deer as killing a man. However, mutilation uh, prior to this of interjection by Richard, mutilation, blinding, cutting off fingers, hands or feet were all part of punishment for hunting deer in the forest. Richard I, however, did abolish that. Um, if you felled trees outside the domain, you were attached by 4 pledges. If a deer was found dead, there would be an inquisition held with the 4 nearest villages as subject. Um, the finder would be attached by 6 pledges, and if a mastiff was found near a dead beast, the owner would only be quit if could be proved the mastiff was muzzled. Um, most of the entries that we have in the records, court records, are of recurring offences. Um, and because of that and this repetition, they're not of great interest. But to cut an unauthorised sapling would cost you threepence. So if you went in and cut a sapling without permission, you'd be fined 3 pence. Um, if you failed to provide surety, 2 pence. And if you felled an oak tree, you could be fined up to 6 pence. Um, and I'm not quite sure what a stub is. You aware of what a stub is, Blue?
Well, I'd imagine it'd be some kind of like free remnant,
Well,
but
that's what I thought, but
yeah, I'm not sure.
I wonder whether it's something a bit more valuable because feeling a stub, STUBB, would have cost you an 18 pence fine. So at sixpence for an oak tree, a stub at 18 pence, I imagine that's got to be something quite valuable.
Yeah, yeah, maybe like
So,
quite a large piece of remnant wood.
or maybe, yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested if anyone listening or watching knows what a stub is. I'd be interested to know. Um,
We have an interesting little quote here from Richard Stone,
yeah,
who writes, Needwood came under Crown control in 1399, but unusually, a royal grant of 1285 had allowed Needwood to administer forest law through a wood moat court. The 24-man jury, under the direction of a steward, dealt with cases from trespass to poaching. Stealing bast, the white fibrous inner bark of lime trees used to make rope mats and fishing baskets, was a common offence, and a separate pannage court met to fix the price for allowing pigs to forage for acorns and beech mast in the autumn. Spiked collars were introduced for dogs as an extra defence against wolves that were common in Needwood until around 1300. There's got an interesting bit about the main road through Needwood. It was called Aylwardsley Way, and it marked part of the boundary between the wards of Tutbury, Yoxall, and Barton, and it ran from Tatenhall Gate to Raven's Nest Gate at Hoare Cross via Rangemore, Berkeley Lodge, and Newchurch. So there
yeah.
was yeah, I think places like Barton Gate, and it says Tatenhall Gate. I'm not sure where that is. I've heard of that, but these are gate anything gate like the Forest Gate in Burton, the old pub, would have been the gates to the forest. So therefore, they would have been the boundaries when at that time, or representing boundaries that would have existed before. We talked about the blue posts, and for listeners that aren't aware of that idea, that the blue post marked a boundary between, the extent of rural forests. And just while we're on pubs, it's interesting to note that until about 1905, there was a Robin Hood pub in Main Street, Barton, under
Yeah.
Needwood. I mean, there are a lot of places that are named after Robin Hood and Robin Hood characters, much quite often latterly, and I'm sure this pub was one of those. Um, it, whether or not they actually have any historical significance is a different matter. Um, Traditionally, though, Little John has always been considered to have been buried in Hathersage in Derbyshire, not that far away from the Needwood Forest, or the Sherwood Forest for that matter. But his grave is still claims, what people claim to be his grave, is still there, and a tourist attraction, I think, Hathersage churchyard.
And certainly Little John's one of the characters that is mentioned from very much at the beginning. He's in the earliest ballads, isn't he?
Yeah, he's one of the core characters as opposed to some of the others. I think Will Scarlet as well is an early character. Um, we've got various monks and so forth before we get Friar Tuck. Friar Tuck, I think, is later, but is also a trope of a friar. And a friar is different from a monk in that a friar is an itinerant
Yeah.
preacher, and a monk is someone who was settled in an abbey and stayed in one place. So on balance, there we've looked at quite a few things there. We've looked at the sort of historiography of Robin, how he's changed over the years. We looked at the historical record going back to the 1370s. What do you think, Jim? Do you think that the Robin Hood idea is as much from Needwood as it is from anywhere, including Sherwood?
I would argue more. Personally, I think there's stronger evidence of Robin being a Needwood man than a Sherwood man. Um, Having said that, you know, in 14th century England, I don't think there's that much difference between Sherwood, Needwood, the Forest of the Clay, Charnwood, all of these woodlands. Um, to your common man and certainly to your outlaw who is on the run and is not so much respectful of boundaries is going to be, well, I'll go where I want. I'm in the forest. Um, that if we're taking the idea of Robin being an original person who inspired the trope, who inspired the character, who started it all, you're outlawed because you've committed a crime. And once you're an outlaw, you've got to stay on the run because if they catch you, you're going to be in prison. So you are by nature living in the forest because you're not coming into town and living in a house or living publicly. So the fact that most of this Midlands area is forested, the fact that by nature of being an outlaw, you're probably not going to have a permanent settlement. You're probably going to have quite an itinerant lifestyle in that way. That I see no reason for him not to have been roving and ranging amongst Needwood, Sherwood, Charnwood, and, possibly as far up to York as we've said. However, in these early ballads, we can definitely place him in Needwood Forest and we can definitely place him in Tutbury, which, if nothing else, we ought to be able to, bring some of Robin's story to the area.
Yeah, I think if Robin Hood is if we're going to accept he's a sort of roaming Midlander, then he's as much a roaming Midlander in Needwood Forest as he is in Sherwood Forest. And as
Yeah,
you say, we've got 15th century ballads that place him in Tutbury very specifically. Um, the the background to him being there in the first place, and the retinue of Edward II is really fascinating. The Battle of Burton Bridge and its connection with Tutbury Castle as well. That connection then being cemented by John of Gaunt becoming the Duke of Lancaster. Um, yeah, I think it's we should have some celebration of the fact that we have a connection with the Robin Hood mythology here in the Burton area, and not just let it all go east to Nottingham.
yeah, absolutely. Robin of Needwood. The story needs telling.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we've sort of whet your appetite for this Needwood character, Robin of Needwood. Please leave comments if you are sufficiently moved to do so. Um, we'll be doing a
Nice one.
walk soon. When's our next walk where we walk around Burton and
Uh,
entertain our followers?
well, that is. I mean, I can say the next walk as of us recording, having not decided when we're publishing this yet. That could, but yeah, certainly the 18th of October, 2025. We have a walk. We have a walk on the 15th of November and a walk on the 28th of December. So those are the three remaining walks for this year. And also, we've got the upcoming festivities on Tuesday, the 28th of October. We've got the annual Cheese and Horse Fair.
Right. We like a cheese and horse fair. It takes place at the Burton Bridge Inn, Bridge Street, Burton-on-Trent. What sort of time do we go? About 7, is it, or something?
Yeah, I think about 7:30.
Bring your own horse, bring your own cheese,
Yeah. Uh,
and
uh,
drink their beer.
house trained horses is preferable.
Yeah, well behaved horses.
Yeah. There are
Um,
some outside to attach them to if you want.
it was where the horse fair took place till 1920s.
Yeah.
So an absolutely brilliant place to have at least a cheese and beer festival. Mini festival that only goes on for one evening,
Yeah.
or otherwise known as going to the pub. So please join us for that. If you want to come on any of the walks, they always meet at midday outside the Burton Bridge Inn in Bridge Street, Burton-on-Trent. We progress from there for a couple of hours and end up back where we started. So it'd be great to see you if you'd like to come along. Thanks for listening today on our idea about Robin being from Needwood, not from Sherwood. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. It's goodbye from me, Blue, and from him.
Jim.
Goodbye.